All right, so get this. Today, we're going to be diving into some really cool science. Like, literally, we're talking about the ideal gas law, liquid nitrogen, and the secret behind making crazy smooth ice cream.
It's pretty fascinating. Yeah, the journey this takes us on,
Mm.
from the air we breathe to the engines in our cars, all the way to making dessert.
You sent over this super interesting school presentation all about this company called Sub-Zero. I mean, have you ever heard of this? Sub-Zero is this ice cream place that flash freezes custom creations right in front of you.
Using liquid nitrogen.
Using liquid nitrogen. That's wild.
Yeah, it's a really clever application of some basic scientific principles, really.
Okay, so before we get to the ice cream, let's back up for a second. Talk
Yeah.
about just the air around us. I was so surprised to learn that it's mostly nitrogen, not oxygen like I always thought.
Yeah, that's right. Nitrogen makes up like what, almost 80%, like 78% of the atmosphere.
Wow.
And we tend to focus on oxygen because, breathing and everything. But nitrogen is crucial in a lot of processes too.
So even though we don't really notice it, nitrogen is kind of like a silent hero in the air that we breathe.
Totally. And it plays this interesting role in something you might not expect, internal combustion engines, like the ones in our cars.
Oh, that's interesting. So does nitrogen actually burn like fuel in an engine?
Not exactly. Nitrogen's is what we call an inert gas. It doesn't really react much with other substances. It's along for the ride.
Wait, so if it doesn't burn, why is it even in there?
Well, so air is drawn into the engine, right? And that provides the oxygen that's needed for combustion. And since nitrogen is most of the air, it gets pulled in too.
Oh, okay. So it's like if you wanted to borrow a cup of sugar from a neighbor, but they insisted on giving you the whole bag, like including the scoop.
That's a great analogy. And actually,
Hmm.
in the past, having all that extra nitrogen in the engine actually contributed to problems like acid rain because the engines ended up producing all these pollutants.
Oh, wow.
But luckily, we made a lot of progress in reducing those emissions.
That's good to hear. Okay, but let's get back to the star of the show, the liquid nitrogen. How do we go from nitrogen gas just floating around in the air to this super cold liquid that can, freeze things in a snap?
It's all about temperature and pressure. And that's where the ideal gas law comes into play.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So break it down for me.
Okay, so to make liquid nitrogen, you have to cool nitrogen gas until it condenses. So imagine you have a balloon, filled with air, and you start to cool it down.
Right.
As the temperature drops, the pressure and the volume of the gas inside decrease, and that's why the balloon shrinks. That's the ideal gas law.
Oh,
Okay, back
okay.
in action.
So to make liquid nitrogen, we're basically taking that concept and just taking it to the extreme, cooling it way down until it becomes a liquid.
Yeah, exactly. And we're talking seriously cold temperatures here, like
Mhm.
negative 315 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 195 degrees Celsius. To put that in perspective, that's colder than the coldest naturally occurring temperature ever recorded on Earth.
Oh, wow. That is mind-bogglingly cold. But how does this relate to, condensation and evaporation, those everyday things?
It all comes down to the relationship between temperature and pressure, right? So when you increase the temperature and pressure of a liquid, it evaporates. It turns into a gas,
Okay.
like when you're boiling water on the stove, for
Right.
example. The heat increases the temperature and pressure of the water, turning it into steam.
Right, I get that. And so condensation is just that, but in reverse, right?
Right. So when you decrease the temperature and pressure of a gas, it condenses back into a liquid.
Oh, okay.
So when that steam hits the cool lid of your pot, it condenses back into water droplets.
So we're essentially doing the same thing with nitrogen, just on a much larger and colder
Yeah.
scale to force it to condense into a liquid.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Manipulating those variables in the ideal gas law to get that super cold liquid state.
Okay, so that makes sense. But now I have to ask about something I've always wondered about liquid nitrogen. I've heard that you can actually touch it for a second without getting burned. How is that even possible?
That's because of something called the Leidenfrost effect. It's kind of like a mini magic trick.
Okay.
Basically, when a liquid comes in contact with a surface that's much hotter than its boiling point, it creates this protective layer of vapor.
So in the case of liquid nitrogen, that vapor layer is briefly protecting your skin from the extreme cold, but only for a second, right?
Exactly. Prolonged contact would be really dangerous. It's like walking a tightrope. You can do it briefly with the right precautions, but you don't want to stay there too long.
Right, right. Okay, that's cool and terrifying at the same time. So we've seen how nitrogen behaves in a hot engine, and we've seen how it can be transformed into this super cold liquid. But how does this all connect to making ice cream?
That's where Sub-Zero's ingenuity comes in. They use liquid nitrogen to flash freeze their ice cream, and that's what gives it that super smooth texture.
Okay. So, what's the big deal about freezing ice cream quickly? Doesn't regular freezing work just fine?
It all comes down to the size of the ice crystals.
Okay.
When you freeze ice cream slowly, like in a traditional freezer, large ice crystals have time to form, and that gives it that kind of grainy texture.
Ugh, yes, I've definitely experienced that. When you leave ice cream in the freezer too long and it gets that weird icy texture.
Exactly. But with liquid nitrogen, the freezing happens so fast that only tiny ice crystals can form. So you end up with a much smoother, creamier texture. It's like the difference between biting into a crunchy ice cube and a smooth, velvety sorbet.
Now that's what I call food science. So it's not just about the speed, it's about precision. Sub-Zero is basically manipulating the freezing process action. This wild demonstration involving a water bottle and liquid nitrogen.
Ah, yes.
What's that all about?
That's a fantastic way to illustrate some basic physics principles. It's a bit dramatic, but it really helps visualize what's happening at the molecular level.
All right, I'm all ears. Walk me through it.
Okay, so imagine you have a water bottle, and it's partially filled with some hot water. And then you carefully add some liquid nitrogen. And you quickly cap the bottle and tip it over. What do you think happens?
I'm picturing some serious bubbling and maybe some fog coming out of the top.
It's even more dramatic than that. The water actually sprays out with this surprising force.
Really? That sounds like something you would see in a science fiction movie. Why does that happen?
It's all about the rapid expansion of gases
Mhm.
and a really fundamental law of physics, Newton's second law of motion. But we'll delve into that more after a quick break.
All right, so we're back and ready for, like, a physics lesson. What is Newton's second law of motion again?
Oh, it's a pretty simple concept, actually.
Okay.
Basically, it says that force equals mass times acceleration.
Oh, okay, right. So how does that tie into our, like, dramatic water bottle demonstration?
Okay, so when you add that liquid nitrogen to the warm water, it absorbs a bunch of heat and vaporizes really fast, turning into nitrogen gas.
Okay.
And gases like to expand, especially when they get warmer.
Right. And since the water bottle is capped, all that expanding gas has nowhere to go.
Exactly. So the pressure inside the bottle, it increases like crazy. And that pressure just exerts a force on the water, causing it to, like, accelerate out of the bottle's opening, like a little rocket.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So the force of the spray is determined by how much water is in the bottle and how quickly that nitrogen gas expands.
Precisely. More water means more mass, for the gas to push against. And faster expansion means greater acceleration of the water, resulting in a more powerful spray.
Okay, I'm starting to see how the pieces fit together here, but this all sounds a bit dangerous, you know? Couldn't the bottle explode?
It definitely could if you use a regular water bottle.
Oh, wow.
That's why this demonstration should only be done by, like, trained professionals with the right safety equipment. They use these specially designed bottles that can withstand that pressure.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. That's reassuring. It's a good reminder that even though science can be, like, really exciting, safety always comes first.
Absolutely. Got to respect the power of the forces we're dealing with.
So we've talked about how this demonstration illustrates Newton's second law, but it also connects back to the ideal gas law, right?
Exactly. Remember how we were discussing the relationship between temperature, pressure, and volume?
Right.
Well, the heat from the water causes the liquid nitrogen to vaporize, right? Which increases the number of gas molecules in the bottle. And since the bottle's volume is fixed, this increase in the number of molecules causes this huge increase in pressure. And that's what ultimately forces the water out.
It's amazing how this one principle, the ideal gas law, can explain so many different things. It's like a universal key, unlocking the secrets of how gases behave.
It's a testament to how elegant and powerful scientific laws are. They can explain simple things, like why balloons shrink in the cold, but also much more complex stuff like how gases behave in stars.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. But let's get back to the cool stuff literally. We've talked about how liquid nitrogen is used to make ice cream and, create these crazy physics demonstrations. But I'm curious about other applications. What else can this stuff do?
Well, one area where liquid nitrogen really shines is preservation.
Preservation, you mean like keeping food fresh longer?
Oh, that's one application. But think bigger. Liquid nitrogen is used to preserve biological materials, like cells and tissues.
Whoa, really? So things like stem cells for medical research or even organs for transplants?
Exactly. By freezing these, like, super delicate materials with liquid nitrogen, we can actually, pause their biological activity.
Wow.
It's like hitting the pause button on their biological clocks.
So it's like cryogenics, but for cells and
Yeah,
tissues.
and that allows us to store them and transport them safely without, like, degradation.
Wow. It sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
It does, doesn't it? That it's a reality that has revolutionized fields like regenerative medicine and biobanking.
This is incredible. It's amazing how something as simple as cooling nitrogen down can have such a huge impact on so many different fields.
It really highlights how interconnected science is and the power of human ingenuity. We've taken this abundant element in our atmosphere and found ways to, like, harness its properties to solve these really complex challenges.
When you think about it, Sub-Zero's story, going from a failing burrito franchise to this
Yeah.
innovative ice cream concept, that's such a great example of that ingenuity.
Totally. It shows that sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected places. And in this case, it was all about, like, listening to what customers wanted and finding a way to deliver it using, of all things, liquid nitrogen.
It's like they took the scientific principle, combined it with some culinary creativity and ended up creating something totally unique. But I have to admit, I still can't get over the fact that you can briefly touch liquid nitrogen without getting burned.
It is one of those things that seems so counterintuitive,
Yeah.
until you understand the science behind it. That Leidenfrost effect, it really is like a magic trick.
Speaking of like impossible feats, I read that liquid nitrogen is even used in dermatology. Is that true?
You read correctly.
Wow.
Yeah, it's actually used to treat all sorts of skin conditions, like warts and moles.
Wait, really? They use this super cold substance to like freeze things off?
It might sound weird, but it's super effective.
Okay.
The extreme cold of the liquid nitrogen basically destroys the unwanted tissue,
Oh, wow.
essentially removing the wart or the mole. And because it vaporizes so quickly, it leaves very minimal scarring, which makes it a really popular choice for, like, cosmetic procedures.
I never would guess that. So it's like a super precise, icy scalpel.
That's a great way to put it. It's another example of how we can, like, harness the power of extreme temperatures for really specific applications.
I'm starting to realize that liquid nitrogen is like the superhero of the scientific world.
Uh-huh.
It's got all these amazing abilities, and it's constantly being used in these new and innovative ways.
That's a great analogy. It really is a versatile and powerful tool. And the best part is, we're still discovering new ways to use it.
So we've explored how liquid nitrogen can, freeze things, create these crazy physics demonstrations, preserve biological materials, even treat skin conditions. Is there anything this stuff can't do?
Well, it's not exactly a cure-all, but it's definitely a fascinating substance with a huge range of applications. And who knows what other uses we'll discover in the future.
That's what I love about science. There's always something new to learn and explore. Now, I'm curious, are there any other surprising uses for liquid nitrogen that might not immediately come to mind?
There are. And one in particular might surprise you, especially given our discussion about how nitrogen is inert, meaning it doesn't react easily with other substances.
Okay, now you've got me really intrigued. What is it?
Well, even though nitrogen doesn't react easily, it's still incredibly useful in certain chemical processes.
Really? I thought its whole, claim to fame was being non-reactive. How can something that doesn't react be useful in a chemical process?
It's all about creating the right environment. For example, in industries like electronics manufacturing, even trace amounts of oxygen can damage delicate components. So they use nitrogen to create what's called an inert atmosphere, essentially displacing the oxygen and preventing any unwanted reactions.
So it's like a protective blanket shielding sensitive materials from the reactive oxygen in the air.
Exactly. Nitrogen acts as this buffer, allowing those sensitive processes to take place without contamination.
This is making me realize how much we take nitrogen for granted. It's literally all around us, but we rarely stop to think about how vital it is to, so many industries and processes.
It's a silent but essential player in our world.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. We started with the basics of the atmosphere, learned about nitrogen's role in engines, and then dove deep into this amazing world of liquid nitrogen and its seemingly endless applications.
Yeah, we've seen how the ideal gas law helps us understand the behavior of gases and how we can manipulate them to achieve some pretty remarkable things. And we've even touched on Newton's second law of motion and how it relates to the forces at play in that dramatic water bottle demonstration.
I'm walking away from this with a newfound appreciation for nitrogen, both in its gaseous and liquid forms. It's amazing how one simple substance can be so diverse and impactful.
It really is. And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to learn and explore.
It really is amazing to think about how something so simple like nitrogen can be so versatile.
Yeah.
It's the gas that makes up most of the air we breathe.
It just goes to show that even like the most basic elements in our world can have so much potential. I mean, when we understand their properties and know how to manipulate them.
Okay, so we've explored how liquid nitrogen can make super smooth ice cream and preserve biological materials and treat skin conditions and even create those inert atmospheres for manufacturing. But I have a feeling there's more to this story.
You're absolutely right. There's one more application that I think will be really interesting, especially because we've been talking about the ideal gas law.
Oh, now you've got me really curious. What is it?
Have you ever heard of cryomilling?
Cryomilling. That sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
It does sound futuristic, doesn't it? But it's a real process that uses liquid nitrogen to grind materials into incredibly fine powders.
Okay, I'm officially intrigued. How does that work?
Well, some materials are really hard to grind at room temperature because they're either too brittle or too ductile. But when you cool them down to these extremely low temperatures with liquid nitrogen, they become much more brittle and easier to grind.
So it's like taking a piece of hard candy and putting it in the freezer. It's much easier to crush once it's frozen solid.
That's a great analogy. And just like with the ice cream, the rapid cooling with the liquid nitrogen prevents large crystals from forming. So you end up with an extremely fine powder.
So what kinds of materials are we talking about here?
Cryomillings is used for all kinds of materials, including pharmaceuticals and cosmetics and even metals.
Metals. You mean you can grind metal into a powder using liquid nitrogen?
You bet. It's used to create metal powders that have very specific properties for things like 3D printing and powder metallurgy.
Wow, that's incredible. It sounds like cryomilling is like a game changer for a lot of different industries.
It really is.
Yeah.
It lets us create materials with properties that we couldn't get with, traditional grinding methods.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. We talked about how the ideal gas law helps us understand how gases behave and how we can manipulate them to make things like liquid nitrogen.
And we've seen how that knowledge can be applied in so many different ways, like from the everyday act of boiling water to the complex process of preserving biological materials.
Yeah, this deep dive has been such an eye-opening experience. I'm starting to see the world in a whole new light. Literally.
That's the beauty of science. It helps us see the connections between seemingly unrelated things and opens up so many possibilities.
And it makes you realize that even the most commonplace substances like the nitrogen in the air we breathe can have such extraordinary applications.
Absolutely. It comes down to asking the right questions and exploring with curiosity and never being afraid to dive deep.
Well said. And I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive for today. I'm already looking forward to the next one. Who knows what other mysteries will unravel?
The possibilities are endless. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.